I want to begin with apologies. I always begin with apologies. And I want to add an extra one. As I thought about this, I didn't like the title. I want to call it Emma Hamilton Bacante, and I hope that will make sense as we proceed. First thing to say is there's probably a couple people in this room that know more about Emma Hamilton than I do. I am not one of those people that has spent years on her. I've spent a couple of months on her, and I was doing other things at the same time. So when I get it wrong, I hope you'll correct me, but at the end, not in the middle. She only lived 49 years and a bit, but she got an awful lot done, and I'm going to leave a lot out, including, I guess, the thing that keeps her, if not famous, at least remembered today. I won't have much to say about her relationship with Lord Nelson, only peripherally. And the last apology is I keep changing my mind. She seems like an enormously complex and contradictory woman. She was pretty thoroughly canceled after Nelson's death, and I have an uneasy feeling she would be canceled again, but I'm not absolutely sure she deserves it. Right, I will run as quickly as I can through her biography. I will try to present a narrative arc, the sort of thing I would pitch to Netflix if we were going to make yet another movie about her. I'll then focus on moments that interest me, and then I'll focus on her two connections with West London. Most importantly, I'm sorry to say, out of your jurisdiction in Merton, but secondarily in Richmond, and that will lead me to a final appeal, which I hope at least some of you will join into, and then you can tell me what I got wrong at the end. This is how I came to her. I was reading the diary of Mirza Abul Hassan Khan. He was the first ambassador from Persia to Great Britain. He was here on a completely lost cause, poor man. In the middle of the Napoleonic Wars, he was trying to get the British to intervene on the side of the Shah of Persia against the Russians who were invading the northern territories of the Shah's empire, and he arrived just in time for Napoleon to invade Russia, which made his expedition complete waste of time. So basically they took him to dinner for 10 months because they didn't know what else to do with him. And on the 25th of May, 1810, well, here is the entry in his diary. We were invited to dinner at the house of Sir Charles Cockerell, who acquired his great wealth in the service of the East India Company. One of the guests was a very large lady, who, so I was told, had been the friend of one of the English commanders whose name was Lord Nelson. It's extraordinary. Not only has he not heard of Emma Hamilton, he hasn't heard of Lord Nelson. This is not an ignorant or uneducated man. It does show you the limits of celebrity. Several years ago in a sea battle against the French, he won a great victory but was killed in the fighting. This lady's name is Lady Hamilton. Her face is pretty, but her figure is fat. Nevertheless, they say that she was sylph-like in her youth and the model for many portraits. Mrs. Percival, that's the wife of the Prime Minister. Emma is still dining with important people in 1810. Mrs. Percival told Sir Gore Ouseley that Lady Hamilton sings very well. So he and Lady Cockerell, the wife of our host, persuaded her to sing for us. Indeed, she sang most beautifully, but her song was so sad that she wept, and we could feel her inner grief. Well, she was born Amy Lyon in Neston, which is now a suburb of Liverpool, but in Cheshire, across the river. Probably born in 1765, but there's some dispute about that. Her father died when she was 2 months old. Her mother went home to her mother in Hardin, the first of the names I had to learn to pronounce for this evening, in Hardin, dumped the baby on the baby's grandmother and headed for London. Her grandmother raised Emma. That's the cottage, now gone, where this supposedly happened, along with 9 or 10 other children. There seemed to have been about a dozen people in that 2-room cottage. She was farmed out into domestic service by 13. That didn't work out, so she followed her mother to London at the age of 14 and was probably engaged in prostitution almost immediately. That should have been the end of the story. Her chance of lasting long in such circumstances, very small. But she was gorgeous and charismatic and talented, and she is scooped up by Dr. James Graham. I would love to do a whole lecture about Dr. Graham, but I cannot find a Richmond connection, and so you probably won't have me. Dr. Graham is the first sex therapist, and he had 2 locations. One, when he really made it big, on Pall Mall, and there's still a blue plaque commemorating that. But the one where Emma worked was near Covent Garden, which was still the most important red light district in London in the 1770s. And Dr. Graham took a high-tech approach to sex therapy, and he used electricity. Fortunately, you couldn't generate much voltage in the 1770s, so I doubt his patients even felt the jolts he administered. But he invented a bed, which he called the celestial bed, which not only was fitted with electrodes to zap you, it also undulated. I thought at first it was a water bed, but it wasn't. It used rollers. And you could spend the night in the celestial bed, you and your partner, for 50 guineas, which would be a year's wage for a schoolmaster at the time. This isn't cheap. And you would not only get the sensory experience of the celestial bed to invigorate you and rouse you to performance, there would also be music and erotic dancers. And Emma, at the age of 14, was the chief erotic dancer. She was the goddess of health, Hygeia. The clients included, we're quite sure, her future husband, Sir William Hamilton, with his first wife. Alas, the treatment was unsuccessful. They had no children. The Prince of Wales, who remembered the experience well enough to pursue her a quarter of a century later, and probably, but I have no direct evidence of this, the Duke of Queensberry, who some of you might have met a couple of months ago, but we will meet again in the course of this talk. She didn't like it, and she didn't stay. So she traded up. She got herself a place in the most fashionable whorehouse in London at the time, Santa Carlotta's Nunnery, run by someone who called herself Santa Carlotta, but whose real name was Mrs. O'Kelly. And Mrs. O'Kelly's, or Santa Carlotta's, gig was to dress her girls as nuns. And I guess this is Emma's second experience of performing a role. And we're going to come back again. It's also her first experience of, I guess, what you'd have to call debt slavery, because she had to pay for the kit, and the kit was expensive, and she was in debt to Mrs. O'Kelly, and she couldn't leave until she paid it off. So whether or not she wanted to move on, she couldn't, until she was rescued, if that's the right word, by the second name I had to learn to pronounce, Sir Henry Fanshawe, master of Up Park, now a sort of grade 1 National Trust property, then a young man with a great deal more money than sense, who paid her debt and took her off to be chief entertainment for him and his guests at Up Park, where apparently she danced naked on the dining room table while the men ate around her, and got pregnant. She thought Sir Henry was the father. Sir Henry had his doubts. I don't, because one of the things that seems to be constant about Emma Hamilton is you wouldn't call her chaste, but she's serially monogamous, one man at a time. So I don't think anyone else had sex with her at Up Park. I think it was Fanshawe alone, but Fanshawe took the opportunity to dump her, and she was taken up by one of his guests at Up Park, a gentleman by the name of Charles Greville, who was everybody's cousin and Sir William Hamilton's nephew. And Greville agreed to take her on as his mistress, but only if she reformed. Now that seems to me like a bit of a contradiction in terms, so I'll explain what he meant by reformed. He found a cottage for her and her mother is going to be her constant companion for the rest of her mother's life, one of the few constancies in her life. Her mother had abandoned her at 2 months old, but now is going to be with her permanently. Her mother is going to be her chaperone and business manager and minder in a cottage in Paddington Green, which was still quite rural at the time. He makes her change her name to Emma Hart. He says she's not allowed to see any of her former acquaintances except for her mother and him. And then he begins pimping her out himself, but pimping her out in a rather unusual way. He sends her out as an artist's model. And he does this because she's already done it. This has been a side gig of hers for a while. This is Emma at 15, posing for Joshua Reynolds. If you look at this closely, not once, not twice, but 3 times. Emma is the angel, Emma is Dido's maid, and Emma is Dido, a very well-developed Dido for 15, but what do I know? Greville very cleverly sends her to George Romney, who falls. George Romney is a very awkward, clumsy, socially inept genius of a painter, and Romney falls hard for her. He paints her once, 4 times, total of over 50 times. And Greville buys a couple of the pictures, and when you buy the pictures, you buy the copyright, and he has engravings made, and he distributes them far and wide. And before Emma is out of her teens, she's the most famous face and the most famous body in Europe. She is enormously celebrated. Greville gets tired of her and wants to marry money and finds her an encumbrance. So he pimps her out again, this time for real, to his uncle, Sir William Hamilton, who is British ambassador in Naples, which is then an independent kingdom and has been there for over 20 years. Greville is 16 years older than Emma, and Sir William is another 20 years older than Greville. He tells Emma that he's sending her there on vacation and he will join her in Naples, but he never does. She is brokenhearted, and when she finally realizes that the separation is permanent, she reluctantly agrees to become Hamilton's mistress. And she goes to work becoming the appropriate person for that role. She learns French, she learns Italian, she learns Neapolitan dialect, she learns to sing, she learns to dance. Eventually, Sir William, completely besotted with her, wants to marry her. He asks his childhood playmate, King George III, if that will be okay. This is required because he's an officer of the crown. The king reluctantly agrees. They get married, and that enables Emma to be received at the court of Naples, and she becomes best female friend of the Queen of Naples, who is running the country because her husband is only interested in boar hunting. So while Sir William goes boar hunting with the king, Emma sweet talks the Queen. And we're in the French Revolutionary period. Naples is suddenly becoming strategically significant. And I won't say much about her diplomatic career, but it's quite important. At the same time, she has begun to perform, at first at the ambassador's residence only to invited guests, but after her marriage, more publicly and to a wider audience. And I'll say more about her performances in a minute. Nelson turns up because, thanks in part to Emma, the Kingdom of Naples is allied with the English against revolutionary France in the early years of the 20 years of war against revolutionary France. And Naples has agreed to provide troops to protect Toulon, which has not fallen to the revolutionaries. And Nelson, who is a captain, is in charge of organizing the defense of Toulon, which is a very important naval base then. And now the captain in charge of besieging and capturing Toulon is a young Corsican by the name of Napoleon Bonaparte. And this is the first encounter between Nelson and Bonaparte wins. And wins easily. Nelson then tries to track the French fleet. And Emma is able to ensure that he can supply the Mediterranean squadron of the Royal Navy using Neapolitan ports. That's basically her work, and that enables him to get as far as the Nile where he wins the Battle of the Nile, destroys the French fleet, and becomes a great national hero. They've met when Nelson came the first time. They're clearly interested in each other, but they don't seem to have had any relationship yet. But when he comes back after the Battle of the Nile, wounded and ill, she tends him, restores him to health, and as all the periodicals said, like Mark Antony and Cleopatra, she seduces him away from his duty, and he cannot bear to leave. There's a bit of a complication. The Neapolitan army tries to invade Rome. This is a catastrophe. They have to retreat. They're pursued by the French army. They have to evacuate Naples. Emma is in charge of the evacuation. Her husband is hiding in the bowels of Nelson's ship, terribly seasick with 2 pistols, saying that he'll shoot himself before he will drown. Emma is the one taking care of all the VIPs being evacuated to Sicily. She's also, I fear, in charge of the reoccupation of Naples, which involves some bloody reprisals and extrajudicial killing. One of the reasons she might be canceled today. I say she's in charge because Nelson did not speak French. Nelson did not speak Italian. She is not only Nelson's interpreter, she is the one with all the local contacts. So I think we have to give her credit and the opposite of credit for that episode. Second time around, Sir William, I think, is now past bedroom performance. He's an old man. His health is failing, and Emma is a serial monogamist. And Nelson is next, but they create a true ménage à trois. It's Sir William that says they are 3 joined in one, tria juncto in uno. That's the sort of Latin thing that he would say. And they travel together by land because now they are celebrities, but they are also scandalous. They are not given a Royal Navy ship to travel back to England. They have to go by land, dodging various battles and French armies and so on as they go. Where they are received with throughout, with huge crowds. They are both famous. This is a true power couple, and everybody turns out to see them. They make it back to England safely, and the 3 of them move into a house that Nelson pays for. Now Sir William is there as a guest, and I guess Emma is there as the guest's wife, but it's Emma who buys the house, Emma who supervises the renovations, Emma who decorates the house, and I'll come back to that, and Emma who's in charge because Sir William is dying and Nelson is usually at sea. After 1805, after Trafalgar and Nelson's death, he leaves her as his legacy to the nation, he says in the last thing he wrote, but the nation does not accept the legacy. The nation dumps him and her. The nation gives honors and pensions and awards to his wife, to his brother, to his nephews and nieces. The nation gives nothing to Emma, not only as Nelson's legacy, but also as the person who's been managing British relations with Naples for the past 10 years or so. And she is immediately bankrupt. She has to sell Paradise Merton, as she calls it. Something happens with Nelson's letters, which mysteriously get published. Emma always denied that she had anything to do with their publication, but they are erotic and, even worse, rude about very important people like the Prince of Wales. And that's probably an even bigger scandal than anything else that's happened to them so far. So she ends up in debtor's prison twice, bailed out by the Duke of Queensberry, who pays her debts and allows her to stay for no rent at Heron Court around the corner. That's our Richmond connection. But then he dies, and his heirs not only don't pay her the pension that he left her, hard to know why, but maybe we'll come back to that. They chuck her out of the house, and she ends up back in debtor's prison and then escapes to France, where she dies as Napoleon escapes from Elba and marches on Paris. She doesn't quite make it until Waterloo. Whew. That took longer than I wanted it to take, but it's a very full life. Here's what I pitched to Netflix. She begins life performing in other people's shows. In Dr. Graham's show, in Mrs. O'Kelly's show, in Romney's show, in Sir William's show, and I will talk a bit more about that. But she literally, and I do mean literally, breaks out of the frame and begins creating her own performances, and I'd say invents her own art form, which is sensationally popular for a moment or two. She begins her diplomatic career as a courier, carrying a letter from Marie Antoinette to her sister, Queen Maria Carlotta of Naples, but she doesn't stay a courier for long. She goes from courier to interpreter, from interpreter to, I guess, eminence grise, the real power behind the throne. And then having the illusion of liberation and freedom of expression and influence and power, it all comes horribly crashing down. And I'm sorry to say that the Richmond connection is a sort of bump on the vertiginous slide from being the most powerful woman in Europe, perhaps, to being buried in an unmarked pauper's grave that people keep claiming to have found in Calais, where she died. Here she is in other people's shows. And here she is with George Romney. That's the first painting that Romney did of her. She's 16 years old. You can see it in the Frick collection in New York. We went to see it. It was always above Mr. Frick's bed. It was his favorite work of art, and there's serious competition in the Frick collection. The dog is interesting. Romney was having trouble getting her to pose, so he gave her the dog, and she loved the dog, and she came to life. But Romney is a very clever painter. Emma has just had her first child, and her figure has not yet recovered. And the dog is covering up the postpartum bulge. And that's what the critics say. I have a filthy mind. I look at the eyes of the dog and I think, ooh, they are positioned interestingly. And I'll move on. Here are a couple of later pictures by Romney. He can get her to become anybody. He loves the fact that she can embody a role so completely. I've had a great number of ladies of figure sitting to me since you left England. She's gone to Naples, but they all fall short of the spinstress. Indeed, it is the sun of my hemisphere, and they are but twinkling stars. Oh, poor man. These paintings revolutionize fashion in polite circles in England and to some extent in the rest of Europe. If you imagine Reynolds' pictures and early Gainsborough pictures, you've got women with powdered hair piled up a mile high over their heads. They're wearing very stiff brocaded silk gowns with waists that are extremely low. They are corseted. Romney brings Emma to the world, and people start dressing, this is what they call it, à l'Emma. They start dressing like her. Long hair, her hair reached to her feet at its peak. Long hair, loose muslin gowns of a single color, no patterning. There's often a scarf. And she becomes, I guess you'd call her an influencer, and a very influential one at that. There is Romney's picture of her as a bacchante. That's a female votary of Bacchus, the god of wine and chaos. And after she goes to Naples, Elizabeth Vigée-Lebrun also paints her as a bacchante, actually painted her three times as a bacchante. That becomes the role she plays most often. This is the one that was so sexy that Nelson didn't want anyone else to own it, so he bought it for 300 guineas that he didn't have. Notice, please, that Vigée-Lebrun is not at all afraid to show us Emma gaining weight. She is not the sylph-like figure that she was a few years before. Good living has gone to her body, but that doesn't seem to bother her. She doesn't conceal it. She never corsets. And it also doesn't seem to bother the people that lusted over her. Okay. Time to talk about the attitudes. When Sir William takes Emma to Naples, he has the greatest collection of what he thinks of as Etruscan art in the world. These are Greek vases, but they were made in Italy. And at the time, nobody thought the Greeks had ever been in Italy, even in Sicily, so they were thought to be Etruscan. She's quite taken with these, and he's quite taken with the fact that she has been posing for a living. And so they begin, and I think he is the inspiration for this. He is certainly in control at the start, putting her on show as a living figure from these statues. He constructs, or has constructed, he wouldn't have done it himself, a frame like a box in which she performs. He has lights that he stands beside the box and holds up the lights to illuminate her, and she poses using poses that a classically literate audience would recognize because they're famous poses from Greek art or Roman art or Etruscan vases or occasionally more famous recent pictures. And what amazes everybody about these is how she's able to change roles. There are no moving pictures in the 1790s. There's no other way to do this. She can go from, this is the change that amazes everyone. She goes from Medea, having just killed her children in a fit of jealous rage because her husband Jason is playing the field, to Niobe protecting her children from the wrath of Apollo for reasons that I have forgotten. And the idea that she can go from this vengeful, murderous mother to a mother who will sacrifice herself to protect her children astonishes everyone. Antonio Ravelli tries to get the sense of these constant transformations in his pictures. Frederick Rehberg does them one at a time. Does them, I guess, the way, imagining them as something that you might see on a vase. He does them in outline against a plain background. Goethe comes to town. He's a real star. He's just published The Sorrows of Young Werther. And here's what he has to say. Sir William Hamilton, who still resides here as ambassador from England, has at length, after his long love of art and long study, discovered the most perfect of admirers of nature and art in a beautiful young woman. She lives with him. An English woman of about 20 years old. He's got that about right. She's probably 21. She is very handsome and of a beautiful figure. The old knight has had made for her a Greek costume which becomes her extremely. Dressed in this and letting her hair loose and taking a couple of shawls, she exhibits every possible variety of posture, expression, and look, so that at the last the spectator almost fancies it is a dream. One beholds here in perfection, in movement, in ravishing variety, all that the greatest of artists have rejoiced to be able to produce. Standing, kneeling, sitting, lying down, grave or sad, playful, exultant, repentant, wanton, menacing, anxious. All mental states follow rapidly one after another. With wonderful taste, she suits the folding of her veil to each expression, and with the same handkerchief makes every kind of headdress. The old knight holds the light for her and enters into the exhibition with his whole soul. He thinks he can discern in her a resemblance to all the most famous antiques, all the beautiful profiles on the Sicilian coins, eye of the Apollo Belvedere itself. This much, at any rate, is certain. The entertainment is unique. We spent 2 evenings on it with thorough enjoyment. But he's keen. It's the movement that fascinates him and I think is important. It's also quite clear that, as far as he can tell, in 1787, Sir William is still in control of these performances. She's the actress, but she's acting in his show. 5 years later, Lady Holland, the most important Whig hostess of the time, making a European tour, but of course you can't go to France at the moment because we're at war with them, so everybody's coming to Naples, and one of the 10 things you have to see in Naples, according to TripAdvisor in 1792, probably number 2 after Vesuvius, is Lady Hamilton. Just as she was lying down with her head reclining upon an Etruscan vase to represent a water nymph, she exclaimed in her provincial dialect, I won't try to do it, I'll let you read. I turned away disgusted. This is interesting. She speaks Italian politely. She's learned from tutors used to training people of importance and status. She speaks French the same way, and French is the great diplomatic language, so she can be effective as a diplomat. Her English is the English of a sub-working class woman from Cheshire, and it shows. She is a much safer celebrity in Naples than she is at home. This is her. Notice that she has taken over now. She's telling William what props she's using and what she's going to do with them. She is now in control. And this goes a stage further. She begins dancing the infamous Neapolitan peasant dance, the tarantella, which you might know from Peter Pan, or you might know from A Doll's House. It's what Nora dances in A Doll's House. Emma gets there first. It involves either her dancing with a partner, as you can see here, probably dancing with her niece who came to visit her, or rather Nelson's niece, somebody's niece, I can't remember. Or she dances with a tambourine. And Alexander Dumas goes to Naples 50 years later and says, we met old gentlemen who had witnessed these magnetic exhibitions, and after 50 years, they quivered like youths over the burning memories. Oh, I'm sure we all have burning memories like that. Here is the tarantella again. She's come back to London with, no, she hasn't. She's not in London yet. Lady Hamilton, inspired by the recent success of Lord Nelson, after playing on the harpsichord and accompanying it with her voice, undertook to dance the tarantella. Sir William began it with her and maintained the conflict, for such it might well be esteemed for some minutes, when unable longer to continue it, the Duc de Noailles succeeded to his place, but he too, though near 40 years younger than Sir William, soon gave in. Lady Hamilton then sent for her own maidservant, who being likewise exhausted after a short time, another female attendant, a Copt, perfectly black, whom Lord Nelson had presented her on his return from Egypt. Oh God, I have to stop and say something about that. Nelson buys her a slave in the slave markets of Alexandria after the Battle of the Nile. They are not yet lovers, but he's obviously coming back bearing gifts. The slave's name is Fatima. All the biographies call her a maid, but I don't think there's any record of her ever getting paid. She is with Emma in England after slavery is supposedly illegal, and she stays with Emma. She could have left. When Emma loses Merton, she cannot keep Fatima anymore. She's broke. And she puts her in a workhouse. She pays extra to the workhouse guardians, so she gets slightly better than workhouse fare. But Fatima goes insane and ends up dying in a charity insane asylum in Greenwich. Do we cancel her? I don't know. A cop, perfectly black, whom Lord Nelson had presented her on his return from Egypt, relieved her companion. It would be difficult to convey any adequate idea of this dance, but the fandango and seguidilla of the Spaniards present an image of it. We must recollect that the two performers are supposed to be a satyr and a nymph, or rather a faun and a bacchante. It was certainly not of a nature to be performed except before a select company, as the screams, attitudes, starts, and embraces with which it was intermingled gave it a peculiar character. This is clearly very avant-garde art. It's not normal drawing room performance at all. They come back to England, and among the people who refuse to see them are Sir William's childhood friend, the king. He's agreed to the marriage, but he won't have anything to do with his childhood friend. Probably he is influenced by the Queen, who has standards. The Prince of Wales, on the other hand, is a great enthusiast, and so is William Beckford, who, like almost everyone of importance in England, is Sir William Hamilton's cousin. Beckford has built Fonthill Abbey, some of which still survives, most of which does not. The grandest house not in royal hands in England, with a tower that is the tallest structure in England until it falls down a few years later. But he's living in seclusion because he's a bit scandalous himself, and he decides to have a coming out party to celebrate the new century. So he invites several dozen important people to Fonthill to be entertained over Christmas and the New Year. And the after New Year's Eve celebration, after they've sung Auld Lang Syne, which they would not have sung yet because it hadn't been written yet, after they sing Auld Lang Syne or don't, Emma dances her attitudes in front of this incredibly elite audience, and Thomas Rowlandson gives us a picture of it. That's probably Sir William, and that's probably his cousin William Beckford with the spyglass. And there is Merton Court, which she bought for Nelson with his money because he's at sea. She buys 160 acres because Nelson fancies becoming a farmer after he retires from war. She fills it with memorabilia, mementos, pictures of Nelson, lots of gilding. It's a bit Trumpy. William lives there whether Nelson is there or not. Emma lives there. Fanny, Nelson's wife, never lives there. The separation becomes formal at this point, and Emma and Nelson have a daughter named Horatia, in case anybody was in any doubt about whose daughter it is, but she doesn't live there. She is kept in seclusion. They entertain on the most spectacular scale, and the whole Nelson family, and it's a big family, move in and sponge off them. This is just about manageable as long as Nelson is alive, but as soon as he dies, it's impossible, and the property is put up to auction in 1808. We've got some descriptions, and they are interesting descriptions. Lord Minto, who was a good friend of Nelson and a patron of Nelson, not only the rooms, but the whole house, staircase and all, are covered with nothing but pictures of her and of him, of all sizes and sorts, and representations of his naval actions, coats of arms, pieces of plate in his honor, the flagstaff of the Orient, etc. The house is a mere looking glass to view himself all day. Minto does not approve of this style of decoration. Here's a birthday party. Nelson manages to be at home for his birthday. And Nelson goes back to sea, and Emma goes back to London. She doesn't live at Merton when he's away because it's too isolated. So she has another house in Clarges Street in Mayfair. Yesterday, the Duke of Queensberry, oh, there he is again, paid a morning visit to Lady Hamilton in Clarges Street. His Grace's convalescence is no longer questionable. A month later, Mrs. Billington, professional opera singer, and Lady Hamilton are become a duo of musical inseparables, and His Grace of Queensberry is admitted about 3 times a day at Clarges Street to make up a terzetto con amore. I can't translate that, but maybe you can. December 19th, the harmonies in a street in Piccadilly are classed in the variation to the taste of the several visitors. The approach of the amorous old Duke is generally welcomed with the wanton god who pierces hearts, but when a reverend dignitary of the church appears, the stop is divinely shifted to pious orgies, devout prayers. Both of those must be songs of the time. So I said Emma is serially monogamous, but who knows? This is the most famous caricature of her. This is James Gilray. Nelson's fleet, you can see through the window, is heading out to sea. He's put her by the seaside, which she never was. She is miming Dido. Remember, the first picture of her is the death of Dido. And if you look closely behind her left arm, you can see Sir William snoring on the other side of the bed, and you can see sundry of his classical collection scattered around the foot of the bed. That's the picture that Nelson took with him on the Victory as he sailed off to Trafalgar, and it was in his cabin after his death. She is wearing the Maltese cross that was given her by the Tsar of Russia because she persuaded the Neapolitan royals to send food to Malta, which was in the middle of a famine. So the Tsar invented an order of chivalry for her. It's a Russian order, even though it's a Maltese cross. If that makes more sense to you than it does to me, you can explain it later. But she loved to wear it. She was very proud of having an honor in her own right. But my God, look what she's done to her hair. She was famous for her hair. Her hair was celebrated not just as a human attribute, but also as a theatrical prop. She used to use it in her attitudes, and she has cut it short. And guess what? Everybody starts cutting their hair short. This hairstyle also becomes fashionable. And in case you doubt this, imagine the only surviving picture of Jane Austen, painted by her sister Cassandra. What is Jane wearing? Jane Austen is wearing a loose muslin gown with a high waist under her breasts. She's got her hair cut short. She is dressed a lemma. Unimaginable to me. I cannot make sense of that, but I will. After Nelson's death, financial catastrophe is sudden and pretty serious. She relies on connections, and her connections are mostly erotic connections. So Fanshawe sends her money for old time's sake, I guess, even though he threw her away when she was pregnant. Greville sends her money, even though he packed her off to his uncle when he wanted to marry well. The Duke of Queensberry, who is admittedly one of the richest men in the kingdom and the world, pays her debts twice, gives her a house rent-free, does her best. And the biographies say he's just doing it out of the goodness of his heart. If you hear for 2 months ago for the lecture about the Duke, you might wonder about the goodness of his heart. I certainly do. Mrs. Bolton, this is Nelson's sister writing this letter, says, "I'm glad you treated the old Duke with a sight of you in all your brilliancy. Depend upon it, it will be 1,000 pounds more in your pocket, for he does love to look at a handsome woman. Treat him as often as you can with a sight of you. That's the only way." In case you were wondering what life at Merton was like, this is the notice in the papers of the sale. The distinguished, beautiful, truly elegant freehold villa called Merton House, most delightfully situate at the west end of the village of Merton, 8 miles from London, late the residence and property of the Right Honourable Admiral Lord Viscount Nelson, containing numerous airy and cheerful bedchambers with suitable dressing rooms, all fitted up and finished in a style of princely elegance, excellent domestic offices, most capital cellaring, lawns, pleasure grounds, plantations, ice house, canal, abounding with fish. Sir William loved to fish. Detached coach houses, stabling, farm buildings, and sundry paddocks of rich land, containing altogether 72 acres. It's already been cut down. The Sir William's executors have already begun selling the farmland. So originally it was about twice the size of that. This beautiful and charming villa is peculiarly adapted for the residence of a family of fashion, and the purchaser may have immediate possession, and if required, may be accommodated with the superb furniture. Do you want all those pictures of Nelson? And other effects at a valuation. It doesn't sell. And eventually, Emma's next door neighbor, Abraham Goldschmidt, a banker, buys it at a bit of a discount. And she moves to Richmond. She moves to Heron House around the corner. the only old bit of Quinlan Terry's Riverside development. It's where Sotheby's now is. It's the first time she gets to live with any of her children. Horatia moves in with her. It's not a smooth relationship at all. She keeps a London townhouse as much to get away from her daughter as anything else. And here's a quotation about Old Q, in case you were wondering what this relationship might be like. Here's another angle. After exhausting all the gratifications of human life, he sat down at his residence near Hyde Park Corner, where he remained a spectator of the human scene in which he could no longer take a very active part. His person had become a ruin, but not so his mind. Seeing with only one eye, hearing with only one ear, nearly toothless and laboring under manifold infirmities, he possessed all his intellectual faculties, including his memory. Never did any man retain more animation or manifest a sounder judgment. I don't know what he's looking at, but look at where he's put his hand. Kate Williams, the most important modern biographer of Emma, has this description of Heron House, and it's clear that it is not much smaller. She's not really downsizing, and it doesn't work. In 1810, the Duke dies, her mother dies, Greville dies, Fatima dies. I think I've left out a few more deaths. She has no one left to rescue her. She goes in, the Goldschmidts die, their bank fails, and they commit suicide. She goes into debtor's prison. She buys herself out and runs away from all the other debtors who want to put her back into debtor's prison, to Calais, taking only Horatia. By this time, her health has collapsed. She has terrible dropsy and has been unable to dance for years. Her health has collapsed, and she ends up living in something that must look much like her childhood home, a one-room cottage in a village outside of Calais, where she dies in the winter of 1850, January 1815, not quite making it to 50 years old. Should I stop? I should stop, shouldn't I? I'm sorry. Are there questions or corrections? Yes, ma'am.
It's not so much a question, but I used to live in the tower on the end of Richmond Bridge.
Yes.
Which is at the corner of town.
Right.
And people told me that Nelson had installed Emma there so that he could float up the river and visit her.
I don't buy that. No. Nelson's dead by the time she comes to Richmond. There is, when he commissions her to find him his retirement home, they're imagining the ménage à trois continuing indefinitely. None of them think they're going to die, including Sir William, who is dying for years. I don't know why they think this. So the first place they look at is Petersham, because they think it will be really nice for Sir William to fish in the Thames, but they can't find an appropriate place in Petersham. So then they look at Turnham Green, and Merton is the third choice, but they find a place right by the crane, so he can walk to the crane to fish, and he also can take a carriage to the Thames to fish there, and he does seem to have done both those things. But nobody talks about any connection between Nelson and her and Richmond, except that near miss in Petersham. Any other customers?
Anyone's on Zoom? Any questions, Judy? I've got a question.
Go ahead.
I detect an American accent.
Well, yes. I'm sorry.
Throughout you referenced the French Revolution, but of course also going on at the same time was the American Revolution,
Yes.
all those Romney pictures
Yes.
in 1782 and
Yes.
so on. And you talked about her being a style icon.
Yes.
I just wondered whether any of that got across the Atlantic at this time, because of course in America they were very much following British fashion, particularly, certainly up until the Revolution.
I haven't thought about this before, but I suddenly have an image of Dolly Madison, James Madison's first lady, dressed a la Emma with short hair and the high waist and the single-colored muslin dress. So maybe so.
Yeah.
I'll do some more homework. It does invite me to say one thing. Nelson and Emma were both unbelievably famous, but their fans were working class. Neither of them was popular with the elite. Nelson wasn't popular because he refused to follow orders. There's that business at the Battle of Copenhagen where he puts the telescope up to the wrong eye and says, "I see no signal." He'd been ordered to withdraw, and he refuses to do it. Emma, Lady Holland doesn't like the way she talks. The way she decorates Merton seems garish and gaudy, but it does spark Victorian clutter. She is even influential in interior decoration, but not among the elite. And one reason she's left to rot after his death is they didn't really care for him much either.
And I know we're up against time, but what about what happened to her children? She had one. She had one with
Horatia marries a vicar. Yes, I'm in touch with her descendants and Nelson's descendants. Horatia moved to Norfolk, which is where Nelson was from, and married a curate in Norfolk, and he had modest preferment in the church, and she had 10 children, 8 of whom survived, and so there are lots of descendants floating around, and they have created the Emma Hamilton Society, if anybody would like to join. And where's it gone? I'm going backwards, that's why. One thing I want to do is invite you to join a project which they suggested. Heron House is the only surviving house she lived in London. Everything else is torn down. The house in Clarges Street where she entertained the Duke so vividly was torn down in the 1930s. That plaque was on it and is now in a pub in Tunbridge Wells on the wall, decorating the saloon bar. English Heritage is appealing for more blue plaques to women, and it seems to me we have a natural candidate. The Hamilton Society says they're keen. Is the Richmond Local History Society interested in partnering with them and getting it done? I gather the process is acutely bureaucratic and takes years, but hey, we're like Sir William, we're not going to die, are we? We can do it.
Well, thank you.
If you're interested, please talk to me afterwards and we'll see what we can do.
Well, Alan, thanks. Thank you very
Did
much.
I do that?
Gosh, that's me. So heavy, the wine. Thank you very much for the fantastic
You're welcome.
talk.
You're welcome.